This video will be a brief introduction to the skeletal system. There'll be lots of bones to learn, and each bone has a lot of anatomical landmarks on it, but we'll get to those later. First, let's do the basic structure of bone. Bone, or they call it osseous tissue, is considered a connective tissue, but each bone is made up of several different types of tissue. For example, we have bone tissue or osseous tissue, but we also have dense connective tissue, and we have blood vessels and nerves. So really a bone would be more like an organ, whereas this is bone tissue. The functions of the skeletal system. This picture summarizes very well. There's some obvious functions that you're familiar with already, of course, like the skull, for example, encases and protects the brain, and the rib cage protects internal organs. And obviously the skeleton supports the body and it helps facilitate movement. But there's some lesser known functions as well. Like in the end of these long bones here, we have the production of red blood cells. And then in the middle of these long bones, we have the storage and release of fat. And also, bones play an important role in maintaining homeostasis. We have the deposition and release of calcium salts like calcium and phosphate. All right, let's look at some basic bone types. We have long bones, which, just like their name suggests, are long. For example, the femur. Here's a femur. And I noted in the definition, there's expanded ends. So here we see an expanded end. At the other end, it's also expanded. So this is a long bone. A short bone, that's roughly equal in both length and width. For example, these carpal bones, these would be considered short bones. These metacarpals would be ones like we just saw. For example, they're long bones. So they don't have to be as long as like your leg. They can be shorter than that. But these would be long bones, and these would be short bones. We have sesamoid bones. These are small bones that develop within a tendon. I should say within a tendon. For example, the patella. So you can see we have a muscle and a tendon, but then this is also tendinous material here. So this bone is a sesamoid bone. It's developed inside the tendon. Patella, everyone is familiar with. There's others that some people have that you're probably less familiar with. I don't know what tendon this is embedded in, but this is a sesamoid bone that's sort of encased in a tendon. I don't know if they serve any particular function, but people have them, and I have one behind my knee, for example. We also have flat bones. Flat bone is just like it sounds. It's flat. Examples would be ribs and the scapula and some skull bone. So here's a scapula. See how it's largely flat. Also, the occipital bone back here would be a flat bone. These ribs are flat bones. Sternum would be a flat bone. Then we have irregular bones. Those are bones of varied shape, like vertebrae and the mandible. So here's some vertebrae. You can see these don't have any particular shape, or any easily definable shape, rather, but they're irregular in shape. Here's some more irregular shaped bones, like this jaw bone. The mandible has an irregular shape. Also this zygomatic bone and the maxilla. Those are some examples of irregular bones. Now let's talk about the long bone. Let's look at the anatomy of one of those. Here's a long bone. We have a lot going on, so let's go through it sort of slow here. At the end of each long bone, whether it's the proximal end or the distal end, we have this thing called an epiphysis, or if you have two of them, they're epiphyses. That's the expanded end of the bone. And the expanded end of the bone is where it forms a joint with another bone. The epiphyses is associated with the formation of red blood cells. There's what they call red marrow in here, red because of the red blood cells. That's the site of red blood cell formation. In the middle, between the two epiphyses, we have what's called the diaphysis. Diaphysis is like the shaft of the bone. You can see it's hollow in the inside. This is called the medullary cavity or the marrow cavity, and inside of that you'll find yellow marrow. It's called yellow marrow because of the fat, or the adipocytes appear yellowish in color. There's stem cells in here, and in the event of emergency, these stem cells can be converted to actually red blood cells, like if you had significant bleeding. Here's another view of a long bone. This is through the center or the diaphysis of a long bone. You see we have this compact bone on the side, and then in the middle we have this spongy bone. We also have this spongy bone filled that fills the inside of the epiphysis as well. Spongy bone, it's spongy in the sense that it has like these plates and these struts or these different channels, but it's not spongy like a sea sponge in the sense that it's not squishy. It's still very, very hard. Here's another view. We see the yellow marrow and the diaphysis. We see the red marrow and the epiphysis. And then we see this articular cartilage. Articular means articulate, or to like form a joint. So we have this type of cartilage, articular cartilage, where a bone meets another bone and forms a joint. And articular cartilage is just a type of hyaline cartilage. So you've already seen that before. Now let's look at the periosteum. The periosteum is a membrane that covers the outer surface of a bone. It's got two layers. It's got an outer layer of dense, irregular connective tissue, and then an intercellular layer that plays an important role in bone growth and repair. So this artist has attempted to show these fibers right here. Remember, it's fibrous, and there's also a cellular layer that's just deep to that fibrous layer that plays an important role in bone growth. We also have another sort of membrane on the inside. It's called the endosteum. Endo meaning within. And that's a cellular layer that covers this cavity. It also plays a role in bone growth and repair. So if we were to take this bone and take a cross section of it, and we looked at the outside, we'd see the periosteum. If we looked at the inside, we'd see the endosteum. So look at the periosteum. Like I mentioned, it's got that outer fibrous level and then an inner cellular layer. And the endosteum is an incomplete type of epithelium. We have multiple cells, which we'll learn about these tomorrow, but we have osteoblasts and we have osteoclasts and also these osteogenic cells, which are kind of like stem cells. And lastly, this is, I saved the best definition and slide for last. We have the epiphyseal plate. Here it is. What that is it's hyaline cartilage, just like the hyaline cartilage you're familiar with, but it closes or gets smaller as you get older. So this is what's called the growth plate. And bones lengthen at that spot. So if we could zoom in on that, what we'd see is this hyaline cartilage. And this cartilage, like you'd expect, has these chondrocytes that sit in the lacunae. And then we also have these osteoblasts, which make bone. And as these cartilage cells die, these osteoblasts take their place and sit in the lacunae, and they ossify the surrounding tissue. So it's sort of like the cartilage is advancing upwards, and the bone growth formation is also advancing upward. And when an individual reaches maturity, the rate at which his cartilage advances is slower than the rate at which his or her bone growth advances. So eventually the bone growth catches up to the cartilage, and that epiphyseal plate or growth plate gets smaller and smaller. So look at this. Here we have the hand of a child. You can see this is the epiphyseal plate or the growth plate right here. You can see the gap in between the two bones. So this would be cartilage in there. This would also be a gap where there's cartilage. So this individual is still growing. Here's compare and contrast. All these little arrows, I'll let you find them yourself, but these are all epiphyseal plates or growth plates. So this is a child, and over here we have an adult. It's fairly faint, but here you can see that line. Now it's called the epiphyseal line. It's no longer a plate. Here you can see it as well. You can see the plate is closed or it's ossified. So we have a child and an adult.